Hello and welcome you to Administering the Student Assessment. We're going to talk about how to administer the assessment piece of the Functional Academics program, also known as the Stier-Fitzgerald Program for Functional Academics. The assessment piece is the tool that you're going to use to know what your student knows. Okay, where to begin with functional academics? What do our students know? The big underlying question always, right? So here's how we're going to start. Before we begin, I want to make sure you have access to the Functional Academics website, functionalacademics.net. For those of you that are watching, the website will be in the chat of this YouTube, in the comment section of the YouTube. If you are a current customer of the Functional Academics program, you will have free access to this and district approval. Okay? Your districts, most likely, all customers at the moment have free access until August of 2023. From then on, districts will have to renew their subscription. So take advantage now and get into functionalacademics.net. If you're brand new, register. If you think you've created an account before, enter in your email and password and go through the steps of renewing a password if you forgot. Okay? Some really important features in there, and I want to make sure you have access to them. Just a reminder, the Functional Academics program, Stier-Fitzgerald Program for Functional Academics, has two components, an assessment component and a comprehensive curriculum. The assessment component is how we learn, how we know what the student knows, and what do we know about the student. The assessment piece is what we're going to focus on today, but we also have the student portfolio, everything we know about that student. So definitely take a look into the student portfolio sections of the website and in your materials kit to make sure each one of your students has a student portfolio. It's so helpful for understanding that child better. The curriculum is the lesson plans for direct instruction, doing task analysis, independent activities, and generalization and extension curriculum. So make sure you dabble into that as well once you're ready to get into the curriculum. Today, we're going to talk about just the assessment piece. So what you will need is your student assessment, your assessment testing kit, and access to the functionalacademics.net website. The student assessment will be a spiral-bound notebook, or actually, I think it's when you put in your 3-ring notebook that you make your student, student assessment is a spiral-bound assessment piece that each student will have in your classroom. The assessment testing kit is a pouch that you have per classroom, or if you're sharing, right, where you have plastic folders inside of each one of these kits with the materials that are organized. If you are new to the program, you will have to go through the process of opening up the materials in the assessment kit box and organizing them into the corresponding plastic folders. It's very easy, and each folder even has a label on it. So as you're flipping through, you can easily access the materials you need to test each content area. Accessing functionalacademics.net is a value piece, not only for being able to access student packages digitally, printing off new pages if you've lost them, if you have a new student coming in and need to create a new student package beyond what your purchase order has been. But beyond that, you have access to your PLOP charts, which are really easy, we'll talk about, and videos. There's a whole access piece, there's a whole section of assessment videos where you can click on each part of the assessment and watch a clip to see how it's done. I'm going to show you how to get to that in just a moment. So the process of implementation of the Stier-Fitzgerald Program for Functional Academics begins with assessing your student. We want to know what of the functional academics curriculum your student knows and where they place. This is a really important key component of this program, okay? Not just a curriculum of different things to do with your students, but what of the curriculum your student already knows, and where are they in the curriculum and what can they learn so that we can monitor their progress over time. We're going to begin by assessing the student, hence what this webinar is about today. Okay, the assessment is only done one time, okay, one time to place the students into the curriculum. Sometimes teachers like to assess a couple of times over the process of implementation, maybe at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, depending on what their district standards are or what their district requirements are, or if there's any alignment with state standardized testing that this can be used to replace. Okay, but ideally, assessing the student just one time to get them into the curriculum, and the data that you will be taking with the curriculum will show you how your student is progressing. Okay, so we are starting at the very beginning today. The elementary assessment has 11 content areas: functional reading, colors, shapes, location concepts, technology, writing, time telling, calendar, money math, community-based training, and independent skills. Community-based training is the only content area in elementary that does not have a specific assessment. When you get into the curriculum, you will determine, based on many of your student portfolio indexes, about what the students' interests are and needs and skills are, to determine if you're going to be working on community-based training programming. Independent skills will be found in the skills inventory section of your assessment kit in the back, the last pouch. They are, again, inventory, they're inventory sheets. So you'll be circling yes and no, or sometimes things like that, based on what you observe, and then also working collaboratively with the family to fill out those forms to best understand your student. The secondary assessment areas are functional reading, technology, writing, time telling, time management, money math, and independent skills. You will find three content areas in secondary that do not have specific assessments, again, similar to the community-based training. They will be skills inventories that will then determine your programming moving forward. So let's take a look at what the assessment section on functionalacademics.net looks like. You have your packet, your student packet with you. You have your assessment packet with you. Now let's take a look at what pieces would be easy to pull up functionalacademics.net. I'm going to go to the page now. This is the homepage of Functional Academics. I'm going to click on Assessment. When you get to the assessment page, you will find your teacher's guide, part 1, and linking the assessment to the curriculum, part 2. These are easy downloadable PDFs that can be saved on your hard drive or your on your laptop, on your desktop computer. If you're an elementary instructor, go through elementary. If you're a secondary instructor, go to secondary. I'm going to go to secondary. When you get to the secondary student assessment section, most of you will already have these areas printed out in a student assessment packet that's part of your curriculum, okay, part of your bundle. If you do not have student assessment packets, you can easily replicate them and print them here. For example, if we click on time telling, we will find the entire PDF section of the assessment packet, which includes the PLOP, the student assessment packets, the guidelines, and the details for each one of these assessment areas. And here's the data sheet. You can print out if you need to replicate the student packet, or let's say you have a new student coming in and you need to recreate it, okay? If you'd like to recreate only the data sheets and not complete with the guidelines and details, we also encourage you, if you are familiar with the assessment protocol for these content areas, to click on the student assessment packet follow-up, which, as you can see, only has, take a look, the plot and the data, okay? So this is one of the features that you can find on the assessment sections. The plot chart here, which I'm going to talk about what it is in a moment, is my favorite tool and one of our favorite tools for working with our students, but you can access it easily from this page. You're going to want to download it and print a copy for each one of your students and tuck it into that student assessment or your student data binder. This is going to be your cumulative summary of where your student places in the assessment in all of the content areas. I'm going to talk about it in just a moment. One of the other features we really like, I'm going to go back here, in the assessment section are the assessment video clips. Oftentimes you open up the assessment, you look at the parts and you think, I wonder how I'm supposed to do that, or what this looks like. Well, we have a page here that gives you a video clip of each one of the assessment areas in a really easy format. So here it says secondary assessment clips. These are all short videos. So if you click on any one of them, you click on any one of them, a short video will show up and demonstrate how that assessment is supposed to be run and how the data is supposed to be taken. Okay, mute myself here. So here we have an example of us doing money math coins with a student and what that data looks like as we take it. Okay, So that's a really great feature of using the functionalacademics.net website. Okay, so before I get into plot charts, let's talk about our assessment testing kit. Okay, again, you should have a plastic pouch, like a carrying pouch that is great to transport and move around. You can share it with your paraeducators and other teachers. All right, you're gonna have nearly all the materials that you need to administer the assessment right here in those pouches. When you open up your box for the first time, you're going to find the materials nicely organized in a small box. They're all labeled. Every single card or sheet is labeled with the content area that it corresponds to. So all you need to do is find that page of labels of the content areas, peel off each one and put them on one of those corresponding, I think, 10 or 11 plastic pouches, and then find the cards or sheets to go into each one of those plastic pouches to, that correspond to the content area. And voila, you have your assessment testing kit. Please be mindful that some of the content areas only have flashcards, some only have sheets, some have cards and sheets. Be mindful of that last pouch that says inventories or student portfolio. Those are those inventories for independent skills, vocational, and community-based training. The only materials that are not included in the assessment testing kit is an analog clock, no phones or calculators, and sorry, no iPads, iPhones, or coins included, okay? My first recommendation is to actually read the assessment teacher's manual. You either have a hard copy of it in your box, which is a spiral bound notebook or a spiral bound binder called the assessment teacher's manual. Looks exactly how you see it here. If you have the secondary version, it will say secondary. Okay. If you'd like a digital version of it to download and highlight, which often is very awesome too, you can click here on the Part 1 Teacher's Guide to the Assessment. It will open up on your screen and you can read it online. If you'd like to download it and save it on your desktop, go for it, or open it up in an Adobe PDF reader, then you can easily highlight it. Okay, so you have both digital and print access to the assessment teacher's manual. I highly recommend that you read the manual because you will find an explanation of how to implement the assessment, some general tips, and what the guidelines and details mean for each one of the assessment sections. Okay, let's talk about that plot chart. In each one of the content areas, I'm going to open it up so you can see here. This time I'm going to click on elementary. And let's click on colors just for fun. In each one of the content areas that you will find in your student assessment packet, you will find a PLOP, present level of performance, or what we call a summary of assessment results for each content area. Okay, so this means where did the student place in level 1, level 2, and level 3? We have a space here for the score. Not only did they pass or not, yes or no, but how did they score? This is an excellent way to see at first glance how the student placed in this content area. Each content area has a PLOP, okay? Each content area has a PLOP. But like I showed you earlier, on the cumulative PLOP, this is where you'll take your scores from each of the content area and put it into one place, okay? So the recommendation for these PLOP charts is to print a copy off of this website. You can also, I think you also have a copy included in your assessment manual or in one of the printed areas, but what we love about the one on the digital side is that it has the space for scoring, okay, which the previous version in the print program does not have. So print one of these off for each one of your students. This is where you're going to keep track of what you have assessed so far, where the student placed, and where to stop, okay? At first glance, when you tuck this into your student binder, anybody can take a look at how the student placed into the curriculum the first time, okay? You're also going to use this as a very important tool for placing your student in the curriculum to understand and help guide you into what programs you're going to actually assign and work on a continual basis with your student and watch how they progress over time. So this PLOP chart is very important. When you get into your actual student assessment packets, you will find assessment details. The assessment details, so let's open up colors just as an example. You find your PLOP. And then you have your guidelines and details. Just make sure I have the right slides here. Okay. So you have your guidelines and details. Your guidelines talk about what materials you will need, directions on how to perform this task, and some tips. Okay. Then you'll find your details. What is the goal of this assessment? What and how are you going to instruct? This is really important. Okay. And what is the response you want from your student? Next, it talks about how you're going to score. The nice thing about these student assessment packets is they have a score sheet right here in the student assessment. So most of the scoring sheets are a circle through correct and a slash through an incorrect, and you can mark right here on your student's packet. Each student should have their own student assessment, so feel free to mark it up as needed. Make sure you use the space if needed to make some notes about how the student performed in a specific content area. But here's where you can take your data, okay? Did the student match the color red? You circle red for yes, or a line through for no. Then you will see here that you have determining PLOP level and next steps. This is going to indicate what you should do next. It says if the student scored less than 80%, mark level 1 no and go to the next content area shapes. If they did more than 80%, click yes and go to the next section. So that is where you're going to refer to your PLOP here at the beginning of the student assessment. Here's level 1, matching colors. Did they score above 80%? Write in your score. If they did, check yes, and move on to level 2, identifying colors. Did they score more than 80%? If yes, move on to level 3. If it says no, move on to the next content area. So right here is where you're going to reference what to do next. Most of the content areas are sequential. They start from easiest to hardest. They go from easiest to hardest and start at level 1 and move up in area of difficulty. But some programs are not sequential, like technology, okay? And some, even though in the next steps, they say, even if the student did not score 80%, do or perform the next assessment part. So please make sure you're reading the next steps when you're doing your assessment, okay? Again, if you only want the data, if you're pretty confident on how you're doing the assessment and you only want the data sheets, go ahead and click that student assessment packet and print out only the data sheets for extra sets, okay? Here's how we score. Again, in general, the rule is to circle the correct responses and mark a line through the incorrect responses. You will then calculate the score by adding up the number of correct responses and the number correct. The number of total possible correct is already filled in for you, okay? You want to multiply that number by 100 to get your percentage, and this is how you'll calculate your percentage. So here in this scoring sheet, the total number correct is 10. How many did the student get correct divided by 10 will give you a decimal, multiply it by 100 will give you that percentage you're looking for. Okay. Again, here is scoring the PLOP levels. Make sure you do determine what the PLOP levels, and remember that sometimes you will be directed to the next section regardless of how the student scores. Okay. You will find an excellent chart further on down your implementation called the curriculum flow chart. This is another very, very important tool to have in your toolbox together with that PLOP chart. We're not going to address it today because it has everything to do with how you access the curriculum and how you place your students in the curriculum, but this is how you're going to use your PLOP chart to determine what curriculum lessons to instruct for each one of your students. If you would like to get a head start and find out how to connect the PLOP charts, there is a YouTube video here in the chat or on this webinar in the YouTube Functional Academics website or on functionalacademics.net. There is another webinar called Linking the Curriculum, Placing the Students in the Curriculum, and you can reference that, okay? So think about any questions you may have at this point, jot them down. You are feel free to reach out to us at any time, okay, after you watch this. Kind of go back and review your materials and review the assessments and see how easy it is to understand all of this. If you have any challenges or questions, take some time to go through it. Make sure that you're confident in understanding how to progress with the assessment with each one of your students. Our recommendations for beginning the assessment, okay, is once you've assembled your assessment packet, start to practice before you start. So we highly recommend that you practice with a colleague or members of your household or your grandmother or anyone that you can just practice delivering the materials, reading through the guidelines and the details to make sure you understand the clear instructions. We often recommend you take like a plastic wipe-off sheet and put it over the student assessment data and use a wipe-off marker and practice taking that data. Make sure you practice on someone who's going to give you some clear and concise responses first, because we know that often when we sit with our students, clear and concise responses are ideal, but not always what we're going to get. Okay, practice manipulating those flashcards and the worksheets and the materials that are involved, that are included in it, just so you have a real good understanding. So when you sit down to work with your student, you are prepared. Okay, definitely practice presenting that material and taking the data simultaneously. Okay, and again, practice on a colleague, paraeducator, or family member. Let's talk about some assessment strategies. When we're ready to sit down and assess our students, here's a few things we can remember, okay? We want that assessment environment to be a positive one. We want to create an encouraging and motivating testing environment. We want to use that positive reinforcement or that praise for what we're looking for. So great job. You are doing an awesome job working. You're right. That's the color red. You are just doing an incredible job. We just want to make students feel confident, even if they are getting all the answers wrong. Make sure that their environment is a positive one. Assessment can be often very frustrating for students, right? So it can be long and boring, and there's not a lot of, we're not supposed to let them know when they get the right answers. And so there's not a lot of positive feedback. So make sure that you just let your students know what an amazing job they're doing, reading and listening and participating. Maybe get to get out some of those fun toys that they can play with in between the assessment pieces and break it up a little bit. Okay. So remember to use that positive reinforcement. You're trying really hard, good work, nice working, good job listening. Try not to make inappropriate comments like, oops, that's not right, or try again, or nope, that's not it. The right answer is, we don't want to give them the answer. We don't want to let them know that they're not doing the right thing. We're trying to be as neutral as possible. Okay. In all of the details and guidelines, you will find instructions for verbal and nonverbal students. I've heard many times that students are hard to assess because they can't speak. You will find instructions for both opportunities. So let's say, for example, in time telling, you show a student an analog clock and you ask them what time it is, and they can verbally tell you. If it's a nonverbal student, you can present the student with 3 of the time cards and have them hand you or show you the card with the time on it. Okay, so you will find those instructions in all of the guidelines and details. Be careful not to add additional instructions or prompting. So if you have to give any extra support for the student to get the right answer, you need to mark it as incorrect. Okay. We want to make sure that we're getting an accurate recording of what the student knows, okay? If you help and support or prompt in any way for them to get the right answer, it's going to skew where they end up being placed into the curriculum. It could turn out that they're placed too high in the curriculum, and it can lead to frustration if we're trying to work on skills that they're not ready for. Alternatively, or contrastingly, if we score them too low, and we enter them into the curriculum with a very low placement, that can also cause a lot of frustration due to boredom, right? Make sure you're testing whether the student possesses the skill, not whether or not the student understands the instruction. So I often recommend that you model the instruction first. For example, if you have 3 flashcards with sight words on the table and you're asking your student to identify the words, you may want to model what that looks like before. Like, I'm going to put 3 cards here. I want you to look at the 3 words, and I want you to give me the word that I say. For example, this says cow. Can you give me cow? And they give you the card for cow. Priming them and letting them know how you want them to respond is going to let them be more successful in the assessment. Clear those 3 cards, present 3 more and say, now it's your turn, give me, and then ask for the next word. I see a lot of times the confusion with students of not clearly understanding what they're supposed to do, which doesn't allow us to get an accurate reading of, do they actually understand the skill or have the skill? Okay. Be willing to modify and accommodate the instructions for the students. I'll give you a couple of examples. Some of your students may not be ready for the small flashcards and may need letter cards that are much bigger or with coloring contrasts. Some teachers will add in sign or auditory or verbal prompts depending on where the student is and what supports they may need. I also highly encourage the use of objects with early learners for understanding colors and shapes and location concepts. Some of those flashcards can be a little bit difficult for kiddos to understand, especially the sight words. Okay, the way to assess sight words is to go down a list and have the students read the list when you're going through the viewfinder. That small fine print may not be accessible for many of our kids, so I highly recommend using other alternatives like a whiteboard board, and you're writing the words on the whiteboard board, and as they read them, they erase as they go through. Even on a screen, on a tablet, on a monitor, how else can you present the content to see if they possess the skill? So feel free to accommodate and modify as necessary. And then when you go into programming, this is where you get to be more creative with the way that you're going to accommodate these programs. Be careful for inadvertent prompting, which means sometimes just a simple eye gaze, or you're like trying to point to the right answer because you just really want them to get it right, can cause them to follow you. Okay, so we just really want to make sure that the students are giving their independent, correct responses. Okay, sometimes without even knowing it, we could be looking at the right answer. We could be halfway gesturing and they pick up on it. Okay, if you need an extra assessment video, we do have one here. I'll include it in the chat. It's also on the website under Support Center under Assessment. This is an older version of the print assessment, but it can still be very useful in helping you understand what the assessment piece does and how to implement it. It won't include anything around accessing the Functional Academics website, but it's still a very, very helpful video. So I encourage you guys to take an extra moment to watch that if you need some extra support. Okay, so from this point on, now that you've watched this video, go get started with your students. I highly recommend that you review each section of the student assessment. Okay, get familiar with all the content areas and what it's going to be assessing. Determine whether you're going to give the entire assessment to each student or break it down into parts. Okay, we often recommend picking one student in your classroom to start with, maybe one that's going to have some patience while you fumble through, that can sit and hang out a little bit and be tolerant. Yeah, and then highly encourage you to go through all pieces of the assessment, okay? All of them. Not like, oh, my student can't write, I'm not going to do writing. I understand, but are there ways you can adapt it? Because what we're looking for is an expressive output. Technology, oh, we don't do technology in this classroom. Maybe try it. You'll be surprised at what you might find out, okay? Determine which of the areas are going to assess first. Some teachers like to do all functional reading first, right? Or all the sight words, all the letter sound ID, the word reading comprehension. So they have a real good familiarity with each content area, and then they assess all the different abilities of the student or each student. Think about who will assess. Your paraeducators are highly capable of running assessments as well. Maybe you do some pairing up where you run an assessment together and then you observe the paraeducator running it, and then you can delegate your paras to work with you to assess the students on their own. And then think about your assessment schedule and timelines. Okay, we have a plan of action here. That's a really great tool for you as well. I have a direct link here in the slideshow, and I'm going to link this slide deck to the video. So in the comments, you will be able to see the slide deck in the comments of this video. Go ahead and print out this plan of action. It really is a great place to take notes. Think about when you're going to set up your materials, who's going to be assessing. Think about your timelines. Is it over the next couple of weeks? Is it in a certain block of time that you allow for your students during the week? Are you going to do math assessments during math time and reading assessments during reading? Or are you just going to block out chunks for a few days to assess? Think about all of that, and you have a space here to write it out. Okay. So your next steps here are to get into creating those student packages. Remember that you have to put together that student assessment, then your student data binder, okay, and your student portfolio. We haven't talked about the data binder yet. That'll be in the curriculum section, but I highly recommend you look at the student packages that were included in your program. Fill out that plan of action I just showed you. It is really helpful to just see things on paper, get out your calendar, take a look at things. How and when are you going to do the assessments? And then get started. Initiate at least one student assessment with your student to have the familiarity with it before you move into the curriculum training and implementation. Okay, if you're in a formalized training, you will receive curriculum implementation training. You can also check out some of the other webinars that we've done that are on our website on curriculum, deep dives into curriculum and curriculum implementation. Okay, so before you get into curriculum, we need to complete the assessments. Then we need to know how to place our students in the curriculum before we start instruction. Okay, so some reflections for you right now. Do you have your assessment testing kit with you? If you do, start digging through it, get familiar with everything. Do you have your student assessment books for each of your students? We hope so. If not, you can always access the Functional Academic site and print out new ones. And I highly recommend you print out that plot chart for each student and place it in their data book. Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us today. Feel free to contact us. I'll put my email in the comments as well, and you can get in touch with us anytime. Thank you so much and have a great day.